Support for WUWM podcast comes from Life Navigators, your disability partner, offering disability services for over 75 years. More on their family resources at lifenavigators.org or their helpline, 414-774-6255.
You're listening to Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR station. This is one of our favorite conversations from WUWM's daily talk show, Lake Effect.
If you're a frequent listener to WUWM, chances are you're familiar with the voice of Paula Poundstone. She's a regular panelist on NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me. And she also hosts the podcast Nobody Listens to Paula Poundstone. Poundstone's career spans stand-up comedy, radio, and voice acting. She'll be performing her stand-up in Lake Geneva this weekend. Lake Effect's Audrey Noawkowski spoke to her ahead of the show.
We'll start with some classic public radio talk. You've been a long-time regular panelist for Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me on NPR, and you were at the last taping featuring Bill Curtis. So I'm just curious, what was it like to share the final stage with him? I know you've worked with him for decades. What was that final show like?
It was great. It was fun. And I have to say that the powers that be at Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me did a wonderful job making a last show for Bill. This wasn't on air, but they had a marching band. And the marching band was really funny. They weren't sort of conventional. They had like funny hats, and I don't know. They were dressed sort of eclectically, and I had even been told ahead of time that there was going to be a marching band, and I still was like, well, where's that noise coming from when they came in? It was pretty great, and Governor Pritzker made it, Bill Curtis Day, and he received a proclamation. And I think that Bill Curtis, who's a lovely man, I think that he was very touched. It was really nice.
That's good. He definitely needs a big send-off.
Yeah. Well, he got multiple send-offs. I kept saying to them, you're wasting a lot of ideas here on Bill. I said, what about when I retire? You've already, now you can't do the marching band because you already did the marching band. His last traveling show, because Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me travels about once a month, maybe. They go to, someplace else other than Chicago to record the show. And I was also on that show, and that was in San Diego. And they got Will Ferrell to come do Ron Burgundy, who's his character from Anchorman. And he was the Not My Job guest. And that was delightful. And it was a surprise for Bill, and he loved it.
I love that. What are your favorite things about working with Bill, or any standout memories from all the years of Wait, Wait with him?
Actually, just on a personal level, he's just a very, very kind man. He years ago, he met my son, and I called him at one point about an issue with my son, and he just always, every time I see him, he's like, and how's that going? And how is he? It couldn't be kinder. And that's nice. Most of us, maybe it's because when Bill arrives at the show at Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, he's not still working on his bluff story. Maybe that just makes him more accessible than the rest of us. But the rest of us are a little bit distracted generally. We're not asking after one another's children because we're like, I still have to write this damn bluff story. And a lot of times the listeners do ask me about the Bluff the Listener game. The stories that are read in the Bluff the Listener game are written by the panelists who read them. Even the person who gets the real story, has to write it up. But the others have to invent it out of a whole cloth. And anyways, to me, it's homework. And so I'm always a little on edge over it. One time I was writing it during the show. I think that really upset Peter. Because I just didn't have it yet. You have to have an idea. I don't know how. I could never be a writer for a living because I can't guarantee when an idea is going to come to me. I mean, I can try to sort of make my brain fertile for receiving an idea, but I have no idea when an idea is going to flit across my brain. And sometimes it's, it's not as prompt as I might like.
Can relate. And I know some comics will straight up write out their whole hour plus. What is kind of your methodology and prep because I know it changes a lot. You're constantly touring. I'm sure you're going through new ideas constantly. Is writing a big part of your prep, or are you more of like a bullet point kind of person?
More, I suppose, of a bullet point kind of a person, but I don't have a set for a couple of reasons. I think that the main reason is just it was never a technique that I was good at because memorizing is very hard for me. The whole time I would be on stage, my brow would be furrowed with the effort of remembering that set. And so really within my first couple of years, when I had only a few minutes of material to begin with, I relieved myself of that burden by luckily discovering A, that I could do it another way, but B, that I was much better doing it another way. So I very rarely do two shows in the same place on the same night, or even, two nights in the same place. There are guys that literally do the exact same thing night after night. And by the way, they do it brilliantly. It's not a criticism. It's not like you wouldn't be entertained by it. You would. They figured out that works for them. I just can't do that. Now, I have material, don't get me wrong. I have one joke that I've literally done, not every night, but many nights for 47 years. It was just like one of the first jokes I ever wrote. And it's kind of a go-to, and it's in my head, and it's reliable. And in fact, I tend to throw it out there when I feel the audience slipping away a little bit. I'm like, oh, I'm going to give them the old International House of Pancakes joke. Hold on a second. Let me rummage around in my brain and find it. So I have material. I just don't have a set.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting distinction because when it comes to material, you've been a stand-up for a very long time, and you just mentioned one joke has a great 47-year shelf life, right? Do you find that material that you use has a pretty long shelf life, or do you just kind of naturally feel it out when you need to rotate something, or is each show kind of frenetic and you just get out there and go with the flow?
More the latter. My favorite part of any night, and I used to think this was somehow undisciplined or unprofessional of me, because it really came from an undisciplined, unprofessional place, which is I would step out onto stage, especially in the very beginning, and despite, hours and hours of trying to memorize a 5-minute set, I would step out onto stage, and because I'd get so nervous, I would forget everything I meant to say. And I was forced, therefore, to just sort of make stuff up as I went along. And part of the way I did that was by talking to individual audience members. And again, when I first started doing it, I just, I felt like it was, an indication of how lousy I was as a comic. And then one day, I don't know, it just dawned on me that, wait a minute, that was really the best part of the whole set. And at which point I started allowing for that, not necessarily forcing it, but allowing for it. And now, so it's kind of my act is a bit of a Prius. Sometimes I'm using gas, sometimes I'm using electricity, and I prefer electricity. So yeah, that works pretty good. So what happens is, I'll talk to an audience member. I do the time honored, where are you from? What do you do for a living? And somebody will say something that reminds me of something else, and then I'm off in that direction. Most of the time, most of what I say with the audience member is unique just to that night. I had these managers years ago that used to encourage me, and a lot of comics used this technique back then, which is we all walked around with cassette recorders, and we would record our acts so that so that we could critique ourselves by going back over this tape of our acts. But also, my managers used to say to me, "Well, if you invent stuff on stage, you want to be able to repeat it another time." I kind of feel the opposite of that. I feel like I like the idea that was just ours.
In addition to your stand-up work, voice acting, radio, you're also an activist for a lot of different things. What are some of the efforts you're prioritizing right now?
I feel that I am donating my life for a year to, not just getting out the vote. Yes, that is very, very important. And it's probably the main way that we are going to restore and secure our democracy. But I would say overall, restoring and securing our democracy. And I kind of sort of headed in this direction a little bit. Last year, I started 50 days prior to New Year's Eve. I started this really silly video series daily. I had this giant advent calendar, but it was counting down until New Year's Eve. And there was a box, just like in an advent calendar, except for this was like a big box with a prize in it for every day. And I would say to people on each of the videos, I would say, I'm a little concerned that people aren't excited about the new year, because people have gotten to where we sort of dread every day, because every day some other, horrible, shaming, awful thing happens in our name as Americans, or to us as Americans. And so this was the premise, was that I was, ginning people up for excitement for our future. And in the process of talking about that, I would say, let's let our candidates and our representatives know what we want instead of just what we don't want. And so I would solicit people to, email me or put something in the comments section, letting me know what they wanted for us collectively. And it's funny, there was stuff about education, there was stuff about free speech, there was stuff about healthcare, there was stuff on every topic that you would imagine people would write about. But as I tried to sort of boil it down, the answer was people wanted fairness. They just wanted fairness. And I thought, wow, that is so great. If that is our North Star, we can do that.
Absolutely. And I mean, because this kind of connects with, in my opinion, how well you do crowd work, whether it's on stage connecting with an audience or using your platforms. I think that you're a stand-up that has a unique skill to connect with the audience, because sometimes when there's crowd engagement, it can really kind of tank a show. But I just want to tell you, yours is the most impressive I've seen in real time.
Oh, that's very nice to hear. Thank you. I started out in Boston in 1979. And this was a period where there was sort of a renaissance in stand-up comedy. The form, obviously, of stand-up comedy has been around, since we were in the caves, I assume. But audiences had sort of lost interest in that form. And so it got reignited right around that time. And it's funny because we were all doing, to some degree, our version of what we had seen on like the Tonight Show. And so there was this tendency to have, and I think audiences were doing what they thought audiences did too. Because sometimes you'd go on stage and people would shout out stuff at you, and clearly they believed they were supposed to. Like they weren't trying to be mean. They just thought that's what they were supposed to do. And I don't know where they got that idea, but you're not. That's not what you're supposed to do. But anyway, so everybody went on stage armed with heckler lines. And somewhere along the way, some of these people decided that the heckler lines were so good that they wanted to be heckled so that they could use their heckler lines. And it just set up this ridiculously adversarial relationship between the audience and the comic. I don't know, it was just sort of the wrong path. But I literally was the only person I knew who didn't do that. I didn't want to have that relationship with the audience. I like talking to audience members, but it's not mean or antagonistic. It's fun. In fact, sometimes people come up to me and they go, oh, I saw you years ago and you picked on me. I go, picked on you? I don't pick on people. I go, we had an exchange. But now sometimes people will say to me, oh, do you remember the night of the blah, blah, blah? And I'm like, gee, I don't. And that's partly because I think from stress, I'm losing my memory. But also just too many years now. It's too much to organize in my brain any longer.
Well, we're all thankful you're keeping at it and touring, and people in the Lake Geneva and Milwaukee area will be able to see you very soon. But for today, Paula, thank you for joining me on Lake Effect.
Thank you so much. It was great talking with you.
Paula Poundstone is a comedian, a frequent panelist for NPR's Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, and host of the podcast, Nobody Listens to Paula Poundstone. She'll be performing at the Geneva stage in Lake Geneva on June 6th. Poundstone joined Lake Effect's Audrey Noawkowski.
That was the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast. It comes from your local NPR station, WUWM. Subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast to hear more great stories about Milwaukee.